Most people will never achieve what they're capable of. Not because they lack talent, not because opportunities don't exist, not because circumstances are impossible, but because they're waiting for motivation to strike, waiting for conditions to be perfect, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the fear to disappear, waiting for confidence to arrive. And while they wait, years pass, dreams fade, potential remains unrealized, because here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Motivation doesn't create success. Comfort doesn't build empires. Feeling ready doesn't make you ready. What creates success, what builds everything worth having, is force, the force of will, the deliberate decision to act regardless of how you feel, the mental power to push yourself forward when every instinct tells you to stop. This is what separates those who achieve from those who merely aspire. Not talent, not luck, not advantages. Force, the ability to make yourself do what needs doing when you don't want to do it, to continue when you want to quit, to act when you want to wait, to push when you want to rest. This capacity, this willingness to override your own resistance and force yourself forward, this is what winning requires. And most people never develop it. They spend their entire lives at the mercy of their feelings. When they feel motivated, they act. When motivation fades, they stop. When they feel confident, they attempt things. When doubt appears, they retreat. They're controlled by their emotional state, which means they're controlled by forces beyond their will, which means they never truly control their outcomes. But you can be different. You can develop the capacity to act regardless of feeling, to persist regardless of circumstance, to force yourself toward your goals with such consistency, such relentless determination, that success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Not through some magical formula, not through positive thinking or vision boards or affirmations, but through the deliberate cultivation of mental force. The kind of force that makes you get up when you want to stay in bed, that makes you work when you want to scroll, that makes you persist when others quit, that makes you act when others wait. This force is available to you, but you must choose it. You must cultivate it. You must use it, and you must use it when it's hardest, when you least feel like it, when every part of you wants to take the easy path. Today, I'm going to show you why waiting for the right feeling is a trap that keeps most people permanently stuck. Why relying on motivation is a strategy that guarantees inconsistency and mediocrity. Why comfort is the enemy of achievement. And most importantly, how to develop the mental force, the discipline, the sheer will to force yourself to win when everything in you and around you suggests you should settle for less. Think about your own life right now. How many goals have you set and not achieved? How many times have you started something with enthusiasm only to abandon it when the initial excitement faded? How many opportunities have you let pass because you didn't feel ready? How many mornings have you chosen comfort over action? How many times have you known what you needed to do but didn't do it because you didn't feel like it? If you're honest with yourself, the answer is countless. And every one of those moments, every one of those choices to wait for the right feeling instead of forcing action has cost you, has kept you from becoming who you could be, has prevented you from achieving what you're capable of achieving. This is not judgment. This is recognition. Recognition that the pattern most people follow, the pattern of waiting for motivation and comfort and readiness, doesn't work, never has, never will. Because success doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Opportunity doesn't wait for you to feel confident. Achievement doesn't wait for you to feel motivated. They all require action. Consistent, persistent, sometimes uncomfortable action. And that action must be forced. Not in the sense of violence against yourself, but in the sense of will overriding feeling, of commitment superseding comfort, of determination pushing through doubt. The people who win, who genuinely achieve significant things, they understand this. They've learned that feelings are unreliable guides, that motivation comes and goes, that comfort is always temporary, so they don't wait for the right internal state before acting. They act, and they force themselves to act. Not occasionally, not when it's convenient, but consistently, daily, relentlessly, until the action becomes habit, until the habit becomes character, until the character produces results that looked impossible from the outside, but were inevitable from the inside because they were built on forced, consistent effort over time. This is what you must learn. This is what you must internalize. This is what you must practice until it becomes your default mode of operation. The capacity to force yourself to act, to push through resistance, to override your own hesitation, to make yourself do what needs doing regardless of how you feel about it. This capacity is not innate. It's not something you're born with or without. It's trained, built, developed through repeated practice, through choosing action over comfort so many times that action becomes your natural response. And once you develop this capacity, once you learn to force yourself forward regardless of internal or external resistance, everything changes. Not because circumstances improve, but because you stop waiting for circumstances to improve. You stop being controlled by your feelings. You stop needing perfect conditions. You become the force that creates the conditions, the will that shapes the outcomes, the power that produces the results. But before we go further, you need to understand why humans naturally resist this. Why forcing yourself feels unnatural. Why waiting for motivation feels right even though it produces wrong results. Because if you don't understand the resistance, you can't overcome it. And the resistance is strong. It's biological, psychological, cultural. It's woven into how you've been conditioned to think about effort and achievement. Humans are wired to conserve energy, to seek comfort, to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. This served survival when resources were scarce and threats were physical. But in the modern world, this same wiring sabotages achievement, because achievement requires sustained effort, delayed gratification, doing difficult things repeatedly over long periods, all of which trigger your biological resistance. Your brain interprets the discomfort of sustained effort as threat, as something to avoid. So it generates feelings, powerful feelings, designed to make you stop. You feel tired. You feel unmotivated. You feel doubtful. You feel like this isn't the right time. These feelings aren't truth. They're your biology trying to conserve energy, trying to keep you comfortable, trying to protect you from perceived threat. But here's the critical insight. These feelings are just signals, not commands, not truth. Just biological responses that you can observe without obeying. Most people don't understand this distinction. They feel unmotivated and conclude they shouldn't act. They feel tired and believe they need rest. They feel doubtful and decide they're not capable. They've conflated feeling with fact. They've given their emotional state veto power over their actions. And this conflation keeps them trapped in patterns that guarantee underachievement. Because motivation is fleeting. It comes in waves. It's triggered by novelty, by inspiration, by external validation. But it always fades, always. If you only act when motivated, you act sporadically, inconsistently. And inconsistent effort produces minimal results. You get excited about a goal. You act intensely for a few days. Then motivation fades. You stop. Time passes. You get inspired again. You restart, then stop again. This cycle repeats endlessly. You're always starting, never building, never compounding, never achieving anything significant, because significant achievement requires sustained effort over extended time. And sustained effort cannot be powered by motivation alone. It must be powered by something deeper, by will, by discipline, by the decision to act regardless of feeling. The same pattern applies to comfort. Our culture worships comfort. We're constantly told to avoid stress, eliminate struggle, make life easy. We're sold products and services designed to remove every inconvenience and discomfort. And we internalize the message that comfort is the goal, that we should organize our lives to maximize ease and minimize difficulty. But this is a trap, because growth only happens outside your comfort zone. Strength only develops under resistance. Skills only improve through practice that feels challenging. If you're always comfortable, you're not growing. You're stagnating, and stagnation guarantees you'll never achieve anything beyond what you've already achieved. Then there's the waiting, the perpetual state of almost ready but not quite. Most people spend their entire lives in this liminal space. They're going to start the business. They're going to pursue the opportunity. They're going to make the change. They're going to take action. But not yet. Not until conditions are better. Not until they feel more confident. Not until the timing is perfect. And the timing is never perfect. Conditions never align completely. The fear never fully disappears. So they wait, and wait, and wait, until waiting becomes their identity, until potential becomes permanent, unrealized potential. This is the pattern. This is what keeps most people from winning. The reliance on motivation that fades. The addiction to comfort that prevents growth. The waiting for readiness that never arrives. And beneath all of it is a fundamental misunderstanding. The belief that successful people act because they feel like it, because they're more motivated, more confident, more ready. But this is backwards. Successful people feel motivated because they act. They feel confident because they act. They feel ready because they act. The feeling follows the action, not the other way around. Let me show you what this looks like in reality. Let me tell you about someone who understood this principle and used it to transform everything. There was a man who wanted to write a book. He'd wanted to for years. He had ideas. He had knowledge. He had things worth saying. But he never wrote. He was waiting for inspiration to strike, waiting for large blocks of uninterrupted time, waiting to feel like a writer, waiting for the perfect opening sentence to arrive in his mind fully formed. And while he waited, years passed. The book remained unwritten, an idea, a someday project, a thing he was going to do when conditions were right. Then something changed, not externally. Internally, he stopped waiting. He decided that if the book was going to exist, he had to force it into existence. He couldn't wait for inspiration. He had to write whether inspired or not. He couldn't wait for time to appear. He had to create time by waking earlier. He couldn't wait to feel like a writer. He had to become a writer by writing. So he made a decision. He would write every single morning, 1 hour. Before work, before anything else, regardless of how he felt, regardless of whether words flowed easily or painfully, regardless of whether he felt inspired or empty. The first weeks were brutal. He didn't want to wake early. He didn't feel creative in the morning. The words came slowly. What he wrote felt inadequate. Every morning his mind generated reasons to skip, to wait for a day when he felt more inspired. But he forced himself. He got up, he sat down, he wrote, not because he wanted to, but because he decided to. And the decision was stronger than the feeling. After a month, something shifted. Writing in the morning became routine. His creativity adapted to the schedule. The words came more easily. He'd written 30,000 words. Not perfect words, but words that existed, words that could be edited, words that were building toward a complete manuscript. And as the word count grew, so did his confidence. Not confidence that preceded action, but confidence that grew from action, from proving to himself daily that he could force himself to do difficult things, that his will was stronger than his resistance. 6 months later, the book was finished. 90,000 words. A complete manuscript, and the man realized something profound. The book didn't exist because he became inspired. It existed because he forced himself to write when he wasn't inspired, because he chose discipline over feeling, because he overrode his resistance daily until the resistance weakened and the work was done. He'd forced himself to win, and in doing so, he'd discovered that he was capable of more than he'd believed, not because he was special, but because he stopped waiting and started forcing. Now contrast this with another story. A woman who wanted to start a business. She had a solid idea. She had market research suggesting demand. She had the skills needed to execute. She had the support of people who believed in her. By every external measure, she was positioned to succeed. But she never started. She was waiting for confidence, waiting to feel certain, waiting for the fear to disappear. And she justified this waiting as wisdom, as being careful, as not wanting to fail. But here's what was really happening. She was letting her feelings control her decisions. She felt afraid, so she waited. She felt uncertain, so she delayed. She felt unready, so she prepared endlessly without ever acting. And while she waited, opportunities passed. Market conditions changed. Her initial advantage eroded. The perfect window closed. not because she lacked capability, but because she wouldn't force herself to act despite the fear. She gave her feelings veto power over her potential, and that veto kept her permanently stuck in the space between aspiration and achievement. Today, years later, the man has published multiple books, built a career from his writing, achieved what seemed impossible when he was waiting for inspiration. The woman still hasn't started her business, still has the same idea, still has the same skills, still feels unready. The difference between them isn't talent or opportunity, it's force. The man forced himself to act despite not feeling ready. The woman waited for a readiness that never arrived. One forced, one waited, one achieved, one didn't. This pattern repeats everywhere, in every field, in every domain. Those who achieve significant things are not those who wait for the right feeling. They're those who force action despite wrong feelings, who push through resistance, who make themselves do what needs doing when every instinct says to wait. They understand something fundamental, that waiting for the perfect internal state before acting is a recipe for never acting. That motivation is not a prerequisite for action, but a result of action. That readiness is not something you wait for, but something you create by forcing yourself to begin. So how do you develop this capacity? How do you train the ability to force yourself forward when every part of you wants to stop? Let me break this down into specific mental shifts and practical techniques. First, you must separate feeling from action. This is foundational. Right now, you probably operate under the assumption that how you feel should determine what you do. You feel tired, so you rest. You feel unmotivated, so you don't work. You feel afraid, but this gives feelings control over your life. And feelings are terrible commanders. They're reactive, short-sighted, driven by immediate comfort rather than long-term benefit. If you let feelings dictate action, you'll always choose comfort over growth, ease over achievement, security over possibility. The shift is simple but profound. Feelings are information, not commands. When you feel tired, that's information about your energy state, but it doesn't dictate whether you act. You can feel tired and still work. You can feel unmotivated and still execute. You can feel afraid and still attempt. The feeling exists. You acknowledge it. But you don't obey it. You choose your action based on your goals, your commitments, your decisions, not based on how you happen to feel in the moment. This requires practice. Your default is to obey feelings. So you must consciously override this default repeatedly until the new pattern establishes itself. Start small. When you feel like staying in bed but your alarm goes off, get up anyway. When you feel like scrolling but you have work to do, work anyway. When you feel like quitting partway through a workout, finish anyway. Each time you act contrary to your feeling, you're training the capacity to override resistance. You're proving to yourself that feelings don't control you. You control you. And this proof accumulates, builds strength, creates the foundation for forcing yourself through much larger resistances. Second, you must build willpower as a skill. Most people think willpower is something you have or don't have, that it's fixed, but research shows otherwise. Willpower is like a muscle. It can be trained, strengthened, developed through consistent use. But also like a muscle, it fatigues, which means you must be strategic about how you use it. Willpower is strongest in the morning, after rest, before the day's decisions and stresses deplete it. This is why successful people do their most important work early. Not because they're morning people, but because willpower is highest then. So if something requires significant force to accomplish, schedule it early, before your willpower depletes, before resistance accumulates. But you can also strengthen baseline willpower by regularly doing difficult things, by forcing yourself to do what you don't want to do in small ways throughout the day. Skip the snack when you're craving it. Take the stairs when you want the elevator. Work 5 more minutes when you want to stop. These micro exercises will build capacity. Like lifting progressively heavier weights builds physical strength. The more you practice overriding your immediate desires for larger goals, the stronger your capacity to do so becomes. Third, you must structure your environment and routines to minimize reliance on willpower. This might seem contradictory, But it's not. Willpower is finite. Decision fatigue is real. If every action requires willpower, you'll exhaust yourself. So you automate. You create routines that don't require decisions. You structure your environment to make right actions easier and wrong actions harder. If you want to exercise daily, prepare your workout clothes the night before. Remove the decision of what to wear. If you want to eat healthily, don't keep junk food in your house. Remove the need for willpower to resist temptation. If you want to write, set a specific time and place where you always write. Create a ritual that triggers the behavior without requiring deliberation. The goal is to reserve willpower for when it's truly needed, for the moments when resistance is strongest, for the decisions that matter most, for pushing through genuine difficulty. By automating everything else, by making productive behaviors default rather than choices, you conserve willpower for where it counts. Fourth, you must embrace strategic discomfort. Your comfort zone is not static. It expands or contracts based on what you regularly experience. If you constantly avoid discomfort, your comfort zone shrinks. Everything starts feeling too hard, too risky, too challenging. But if you regularly expose yourself to discomfort, your comfort zone expands. Things that once felt impossible become manageable. Challenges that once paralyzed you become opportunities. This means deliberately choosing difficulty, not for its own sake, but strategically, to expand capacity, to prove to yourself that you can handle more than you think. Cold showers, difficult conversations, physical challenges, public speaking, whatever makes you uncomfortable in a way that's not actually dangerous. Do it regularly. Force yourself into it. And notice what happens. The discomfort doesn't destroy you. You handle it. You survive. You even grow from it. And this experience changes your relationship with discomfort. It stops being something to avoid at all costs and becomes something you can choose when it serves your goals. Fifth, you must commit fully to outcomes rather than conditionally to attempts. Most people engage in half commitment. They'll try something. They'll give it a shot. They'll see how it goes. This language reveals the lack of force behind the effort. Trying is tentative. Seeing how it goes is passive. Giving it a shot leaves exit ramps everywhere. And when commitment is conditional, effort is inconsistent. When things get hard, when resistance increases, when results don't come quickly, the conditional commitment evaporates. The person quits, tells themselves it wasn't meant to be, that they gave it a fair try. But full commitment is different. Full commitment means deciding the outcome will happen, period. Not trying to make it happen, making it happen. Not seeing if it's possible, making it possible, not hoping it works out, forcing it to work out. This level of commitment changes everything, because when quitting isn't an option, when you've burned the bridges and committed fully, you find resources you didn't know you had. You persist through obstacles that would have stopped you under conditional commitment. You force solutions. You adapt. You overcome. Because you must. Because you've decided. And the decision is absolute. This is the mindset of people who achieve extraordinary things. They don't try, they commit. They don't hope. They force. They don't wait for favorable conditions. They create favorable conditions through relentless effort. And this commitment, this willingness to force outcomes rather than hope for them, this is what makes the impossible possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible, and ultimately inevitable if the commitment is maintained. Now here's something critical. There comes a moment in every significant endeavor when consistent effort and force of will reach a tipping point. When momentum shifts, when what was hard becomes easier, when resistance decreases, when results begin compounding. This moment is not obvious when you're in the struggle. You're forcing yourself daily, pushing through resistance, showing up when you don't want to, and it feels like nothing is working, like you're making no progress, like the effort is futile. But beneath the surface, accumulation is happening. Every forced action is building capacity. Every day of showing up despite not wanting to is strengthening discipline. Every moment of choosing commitment over comfort is rewiring your identity. And this accumulation, invisible as it is, reaches a critical mass. And when it does, everything shifts. Suddenly, the thing that required tremendous force starts feeling natural. The habit that was difficult becomes automatic. The goal that seemed distant appears achievable. This is the moment when forced effort becomes effortless momentum, when discipline transforms into identity, when the person who had to force themselves becomes the person who simply does. But here's what you must understand. This moment only comes if you persist through the period when forcing is required. Most people quit before reaching this tipping point. They force themselves for days or weeks. They don't see dramatic results. They don't feel the shift yet. So they conclude it's not working. They give up. They return to waiting for motivation. And they never discover that they were close. That persistence for just a bit longer would have broken through. That the accumulation they couldn't see was about to manifest. This is why force is not just initial push. It's sustained push. It's showing up day after day even when progress seems invisible. It's continuing to force yourself forward even when doubt suggests you're wasting effort. It's trusting that the accumulation is happening even when you can't see it yet, because it is happening. Every forced action counts. Every day of discipline adds up. Every moment of pushing through resistance builds momentum that will eventually carry you forward with less effort than it currently requires. Think about learning any complex skill. Initially, every aspect requires conscious effort, concentration, force. It's exhausting. You have to make yourself practice. Make yourself persist through the awkward phase. Make yourself continue when progress seems impossibly slow. But if you force yourself through this phase, something miraculous happens. The skill integrates. What required tremendous concentration becomes intuitive. What exhausted you becomes energizing. What you had to force becomes something you simply are. This is what forcing yourself to win creates, not just achievement of specific goals, but transformation of who you are. The person who forces themselves to write daily becomes a writer. The person who forces themselves to exercise daily becomes fit. The person who forces themselves to build their business daily becomes an entrepreneur. The forcing doesn't just produce results, it produces identity. And once identity shifts, the results become natural expressions of who you've become rather than things you're trying to achieve. So what does this mean for you? Right now, in whatever you're facing, it means you stop waiting. You stop hoping for motivation to arrive. You stop organizing your life around comfort. You stop looking for the perfect conditions. You accept that winning requires force. That achievement requires pushing through resistance. That success requires doing what you don't feel like doing consistently over time. And you decide to do it. Not try to do it. Not see if you can do it. Do it. You identify the goal that matters most. The thing that would genuinely change your life if achieved. And you commit to it fully. Not conditionally. Fully. You decide it will happen, and then you force it to happen. You create a plan, you establish routines, you remove friction, and then you execute every single day, whether you feel like it or not, whether conditions are favorable or not, whether progress is visible or not. You force yourself to act, to show up, to do the work. And when resistance comes, and it will come, when you don't want to continue, when quitting seems appealing, when every part of you wants to wait for a better day, you override it. You force yourself forward, not through gritted teeth aggression, but through calm, determined will. Through the recognition that this moment, this choice to push through resistance, this is where winning happens. This is where strength builds. This is where the person you're becoming is forged. Because here's the final truth. Every significant achievement in human history came through force. Not the force of domination, the force of will. Someone decided something would happen, and they forced it into existence through persistent effort despite obstacles, despite doubt, despite fear, despite comfort calling them back. They forced themselves to continue when quitting was easier. They forced themselves to act when waiting was safer. They forced themselves to win when losing was the path of least resistance. You have this same capacity, this same power. The ability to force yourself beyond your current limitations, to push through resistance, to act despite fear, to persist despite difficulty. to create through sheer will what doesn't exist through luck or circumstance. This power is not given. It's taken. It's claimed through the decision to stop waiting and start forcing, through the commitment to show up regardless of feeling, through the discipline to act consistently regardless of result. And when you claim this power, when you develop the capacity to force yourself toward your goals with unwavering consistency, everything changes. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you become stronger, capable of more than you believed, able to achieve what seemed impossible, not through magic, not through luck, through force, through will, through the decision to win and the discipline to force yourself to win regardless of what that requires. This is not comfortable. This is not easy. This will require you to override your biology, your conditioning, your habits. It will require you to act when you don't want to continue when you want to quit, to push when you want to rest. But this is also the only path to genuine achievement, the only way to realize your potential, the only method that produces extraordinary results. So decide now, will you continue waiting for the right feeling, hoping for motivation to carry you, organizing your life around comfort? Or will you accept that winning requires force, that achievement requires discipline, that success requires doing what you don't feel like doing consistently until it becomes who you are? One path keeps you where you are. The other takes you where you want to be. Choose. And if you choose force, if you choose discipline, if you choose to win, then begin. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Now, this moment. With whatever is in front of you, force yourself to act. And tomorrow, force yourself again. And the next day. And the next. Until forcing becomes habit. Until habit becomes character. Until character produces the outcomes that were always possible but only become actual through force. You have everything you need. The only question is whether you'll use it, whether you'll stop waiting and start forcing, whether you'll claim the power that's been available all along but requires the courage to seize it. Force yourself to win, not someday, now, and discover what you've always been capable of achieving when you stop hoping and start forcing. When you stop trying and start committing. When you stop waiting and start winning.